Okay, we're moving on. We are now going to talk about involuntary manslaughter. Involuntary manslaughter is a type of homicide or murder. A homicide is the killing of one human being by another. A homicide, if you use the term correctly, it doesn't say whether the killing is lawful or unlawful. A homicide simply describes the death of an individual, and it says that the death occurred at the hands of another individual. So this is a type of homicide. Involuntary manslaughter is also a type of murder. There's two kinds of involuntary manslaughter. One where the person is in unlawful behavior, and one where the person, lawful behavior. Let me do this. So we're going to take each one individually. The first one I want to talk about is unlawful killing. The word unlawful is one of the keys to involuntary manslaughter. It's the key to voluntary manslaughter, and it's the key to murder. All three the person is engaging in unlawful behavior. Unlawful behavior has a very specific definition. It is a killing where the person engaged in the killing did not do it in a manner that was justified and did not do it in a manner that's excusable. Justifiable killings and excusable killings have a specific definition. A justifiable killing is one that's committed by a public officer. For most of us, that would mean a police officer. A police officer has to be engaged in the performance of their duty. So if you have a police officer that's not at work and that intentionally kills somebody for a nefarious reason, that doesn't qualify under justifiable killing. The officer has to be engaged in lawful, during the commission of his lawful duty or her lawful duty. So if an officer is protecting the life of an individual, if an officer is protecting their life or the life of another officer, that would be considered a justifiable killing. Somebody takes a gun and points it at an officer and tries to shoot them, and the officer shoots back in defense, and the person dies. That would be a justifiable killing. So the definition is very specific, and it only qualifies if the person's a public officer. And they have to be engaged in the commission of their duty. All right. Excusable homicide is a little different. Excusable homicide can be a bit confusing because the definition uses the words accident or misfortune. So when we think in general terms about accident and misfortune, we're not asking the question, were they engaged in lawful behavior? But in order to fall under this category of excusable homicide, the person has to be engaged in lawful behavior when the accident occurs. And that's the key. They have to be engaged in lawful behavior. If I'm driving 25 miles an hour on the road and the speed limit is 25 miles an hour and the roads are clear and there's no other indication, no other factors that I can see or that I should know that tells me I need to slow down, and I'm driving the speed limit and somebody jumps out in front of me and they die, that is an accident. But I was engaged in lawful behavior. I was driving at the speed limit. And there were no other factors to tell me that I should be slowing down. That would be an excusable killing. It is an accident or misfortune. It's unfortunate somebody died. Nobody was engaged in anything that was nefariously dangerous or had any high degree of risk. And unfortunately, somebody died. So let's say that I'm driving down the road, I'm driving down a residential street, and I see a bunch of kids playing soccer. Okay, the speed limit is 25. I slow down to 20 miles an hour because I know kids, first of all, the ball can go out into the street and children are going to chase the ball. There's always a risk that a child could get hurt if they're not paying attention to cars. So I slow down to 10 to 15 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour, and unfortunately a child jumps out in front of my car. I hit the child and the child dies. That's an excusable homicide. Yes, it's an accident and misfortune, but I was engaged in lawful behavior. So when would there be an accident or misfortune where it would fall in the category of involuntary manslaughter and not be an excusable homicide? If I am driving 25 miles an hour and I see a bunch of kids playing soccer and I don't slow down, or if I'm doing 30 miles an hour and I don't see the kids playing soccer and one of the kids jumps out and runs in front of my car and I'm exceeding the speed limit only by 5 miles an hour, I'm still engaged in an infraction. It's a traffic violation, and unfortunately somebody died. It was an accident, but they were not engaged in lawful behavior. Let's say I'm going down the highway and the speed limit is 65. And in my mind, I'm thinking 65 is a suggestion. And I'm doing 85 miles an hour or I'm doing 80 miles an hour and I cause an accident and somebody dies. Normally, if an officer was to stop me for doing 80 miles an hour, I would get a ticket and I would have to pay a fine. But unfortunately, somebody died. I didn't anticipate anybody dying. I didn't want anybody to die. Yes, I'm going at a fast speed. I'm not engaged in um, um, life-threatening behavior. I'm not in. This is not would be considered high risk. People drive at 80 miles an hour every day, and that doesn't mean that it's lawful. It doesn't mean that it is reckless. It is simply unlawful. And somebody dies, you talk to the driver of the car that was doing 80 miles an hour, and they will tell you, I wasn't trying to kill anybody. And that is an accident or misfortune. But they were engaged in unlawful behavior. That would be involuntary manslaughter. So the key is to focus on whether or not the accident or misfortune was lawful or unlawful. Don't get lost and simply say, well, this was an accident, therefore it can't be involuntary manslaughter. Don't let your sense of justice or fairness or social justice dictate that, well, this is an accident. How can you put someone in prison for engaging in an accident? People go to prison all the time for engaging in accidents. Every year at juvenile hall, there is at least one case or two cases where you're sending a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old to juvenile hall for a year because they're in love, snuck out of their parents' home, took their parents' car, and they don't have a driver's license, picked up their girlfriend, was driving down the rural roads between here and Coalinga, between Fresno and Coalinga, and they get into an accident and the girlfriend dies. I did, I think, 5 cases while I worked out at juvenile hall that came through our office. And that's almost the exact same thing. I had one where a girl picked up her girlfriend, took her dad's car, picked up her girlfriend. They're playing around in the car, driving about 65 miles an hour on a road, a 2-lane road out in the middle of nowhere. She lost control of the vehicle. The car rolled. She lived. The passenger died. Right? It's an accident. It's stupidity. It's just a young kid doing something dumb. But unfortunately, she was engaged in unlawful behavior. Right? She was driving without a license. And she was joyriding. Those are two crimes. Joyriding's a misdemeanor or a misdemeanor auto theft. And so, although it's an accident, although it's a misfortune, although we all know that nobody wins from that everybody's sad, driver never intended to kill anybody. They weren't even they had no evil intent in their mind. Unfortunately, somebody died while they were breaking the law, and it does not amount to a felony, and therefore, it is involuntary manslaughter. All right. This is just another slide. I put the same rules in a different order, if that helps you in any way. And then the key here, and I put a separate slide so you understand, the key is they're doing an unlawful act, right? Okay. All right. So let's go to excusable homicide. The key is lawful. Focus on lawful. There has to be lawful behavior in order to qualify under excusable. All right. So I said at the very beginning that the first part of the definition is the unlawful killing of one human being during the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony, which is dangerous to human life under circumstances of its commission. Okay, so the key is when you talk about involuntary manslaughter, you have to decide whether it's a lawful or unlawful killing. All right, so that's the first one. The second half, let me go here. Oh, before I justifiable, we talked about that. And then the last key to this first definition of involuntary manslaughter, it's not amounting to a felony. So that means it's going to be an infraction or it's going to be a misdemeanor. So felonies would be arson, robbery, burglary, mayhem, torture, kidnapping. All of those are going to be felony crimes, so they're not going to qualify for involuntary manslaughter. So on the test, I'm going to have to tell you this is a misdemeanor, or you're going to have to know. Like for instance, a battery is a misdemeanor, right? A trespass is a misdemeanor. Arson, felony. Robbery, felony. Burglaries are felonies. All three classifications of burglary are all going to be felonies. And if it's an infraction on the test, I'm probably going to have to tell you it's an infraction, unless it's common knowledge, like a traffic ticket. Everyone knows a traffic ticket for speeding, for instance, would be an infraction. Okay, so an unlawful killing during the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to a felony. All right, so that's the first one. The second way to qualify for involuntary manslaughter, if you're engaged in lawful behavior. Okay, well, so how do we distinguish between this whole gateway by unlawful behavior and now I'm talking about lawful behavior? The key here is you're engaged in lawful behavior, but the type of activity that you're engaged in has a high degree of a risk of death or great bodily injury. So for instance, if I'm an electrician, and let's say the state of California says, in order for me to work on certain type of high powered electrical lines, I have to have a certain state certification, because the state recognizes that working on these type of electrical lines, if you don't do it correctly, there's always the risk of death or great bodily injury. And let's assume that I am a trained electrician, but I don't have that certification. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if I have the training or not. If the law says I have to have this certificate in order for me to do the work, my failure to have the certificate is a violation of the law. Okay? All right. So in this case, I have the certificate, but I'm doing it in a manner. I'm working on high-powered electrical lines, but I'm not following protocol. I'm not following the rules. I'm doing it in a manner that is without due caution or circumspection. In other words, I'm not reflecting on what I'm doing. I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing. I'm not being cautious in the work that I'm performing. Let me give you an example of where this would apply. In the state of California, you have to have a certificate if you want to do certain type of facial peels. I don't know what a facial peel is. I've never had one. I don't know why somebody wants to peel their face, but apparently you can do it and you pay somebody to do it. Crazy as this. You know what? We're going to run out of time. I'm going to move on to part 4 of involuntary manslaughter. And so I'm going to end it here. So I need an outline and submitted through assignments. And then we're going to move on to video number 2, and I will complete involuntary for you.